Hi everyone. The next concert of the Amarillo Symphony features Samuel Barber's beautiful Knoxville, Summer of 1915, which is an orchestral song sung by a soprano that basically tells the story of life on the porch in a summer's evening in Tennessee. It's an absolutely beautiful sound world, beautiful text, and we're also pairing it with a bluegrass surprise, rather unusually. But you'll have to come to the concert to find out exactly what that is. But I wanted to talk now about this, Brahms's First Symphony, which, if you know your music history, wouldn't exist without this, Beethoven's Ninth, a piece which we're closing our season with this year. Now, Brahms, like so many composers in the German-speaking world, had a really hard time dealing with, in a way, the elephant in the room. What do you do with the symphony now that Beethoven has basically come and imploded the genre with his Ninth? He's added in a text by Schiller, Ode to Joy, he's added a chorus, he's added soloists, and so now the symphony is basically unrecognizable. And in some way, music history is about, in the 19th century at least, how did different composers deal with the fact that the symphony was this new orchestral genre which could be almost anything? And different composers had different responses. You know, Hector Berlioz went down the road of program music, for example, but also added choir and soloists in the same way Beethoven did. Coming to Brahms, he basically didn't know what to do. And so he was so confused that he spent a long time, until he was well in his 40s, before he finished this symphony. And from the first initial ideas for the First Symphony until the completion took about 21 years of Brahms's life. So he really had a hard time, kind of a writer's block for composers. What's important about Brahms's First Symphony is that he trials other orchestral genres almost as a preparation for the symphony. So there are two orchestral serenades. There's a variations on a theme by Joseph Haydn. There's the first piano concerto. All of them demonstrate Brahms trying to deal with writing for orchestra. And it's not until the First Symphony that he succeeds in completing what is essentially a symphony. Now, he doesn't go down the road of chorus and text and soloists. It's entirely instrumental for a kind of a standard-sized romantic orchestra. Now, Beethoven's Fifth and Beethoven's Ninth are very important because they show this idea, which is a very typically Beethoven theme, of starting in a very dark place. You know, for example, or both of those symphonies end in the happiest, most elated way, you know. In the Fifth Symphony, or the famous with the Ode to Joy of the Ninth. And so this trajectory of, you know, deep depression, kind of darkness, tension, to light at the end of the symphony, or joy or elation, or going through almost a cathartic journey. That's the most important aspect of, I think, Beethoven's work that Brahms is influenced by. And so the First Symphony begins in the same way, in this dark place, the same key as the Fifth Symphony. We're in C minor. We know that we're going to end in C major. Brahms actually finishes the first movement itself in C major, but also the entire symphony. And so that same trajectory happens, and that's a very important part of Brahms's work. The symphony begins with this almost kind of primordial timpani, just the repetition of a C, as in do, the note, again and again and again. And it reminds me, at least, of this concept of fate knocking on the door, which is a very important part of Beethoven's Fifth, because what he does is he takes this motive of, and he throws it all around the orchestra. And so this knocking, knock, 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 creates this insistence of the idea of fate and inevitability and all the things that come with Beethoven's Fifth. And so that happens at the beginning of Brahms. But what he does on top of that is he creates almost kind of splatterings of paint that conflict and create huge tension between, for example, the strings and the woodwind, you know. So having used almost all the octaves available of C in the orchestra, you know, my piano's not very in tune, but you can hear the C across the orchestra. And what he does is he just winds up the kind of sense of tension through the harmony. So here you have... And so it's just pure stress, and you know we need a massage after the opening. And so what happens is we go through this incredible, almost philosophical working of a similar kind of a 3-note motive that Beethoven uses as well, where you have this. And so you hear this all through the orchestra. So the philosophical part of debate in a symphony is always there in the first symphony. The second movement, possibly one of the most romantic movements, we go into this almost transcendental key of E major. And the first violins play this absolutely beautiful, almost yearning kind of melody. And I think it's important to think about Brahms's biography at this point. We know that he was obsessed and loved beyond belief Clara Schumann. Some of the letters, he's very explicit, and he talks about how, you know, he's just overcome by love for this incredible woman. In fact, at some point after Robert Schumann's death, he moves in and he helps, and he's part of the family. And so there's a huge romantic love in the same way that there is between Gustav and Alma Mahler, for example. The Fifth Symphony, Gustav Mahler being an example of a love letter in music. And I think to some extent this is similar. Even the kind of melodic arch in itself, it has a sense of yearning. But what's interesting is what happens next. And in a way, the kind of peace and hope and, romance of that opening is basically destroyed in 2 or 3 measures. So then the horns play that, and then we have this. So from what was a very, very beautiful, romantic E major, he's basically thrown all that away and modulated into E minor, implicitly. And so, in a sense, it's the opposite to the idea of the darkness to light. He does the opposite right in the first 3-4 measures. You know, we have the light, and then he just basically says, actually, you know what? And it's little subtle changes in the romance that I think makes this symphony so romantic and so personal to Brahms, because he creates a narrative using the harmony, using the way that the orchestra works. The final movement, and I did say initially that there is no text attached to this, but in actual fact there is a famous letter where Brahms makes it very clear that this final movement horn solo, very, very famous, beautiful solo, actually does have a text attached to it, because he writes it. Hoch auf dem Berg, tief im Tal, grüß ich dich viel tausendmal, which he writes to Clara Schumann. High in the mountain, low or deep in the valley, I greet you 1,000 times, or many thousand times. And so actually, although you can say that this symphony is an absolute symphony in the sense that it doesn't have a program or words specifically, actually I think that if you look at Brahms and you look at the romance of his character and you look at the way that he structures the symphony, in some way I think it really is a love letter to Clara Schumann. At the end of it all, we do get this beautiful theme, this incredible, almost a chorale, which finally, having all the tension of the C minor that opens the entire symphony, we get to this moment of peace and the tensions resolved, and we've made it to this.